Welcome to Richer Soul, Laura Hamill. It's great to have you join us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Rocky. I'm excited to talk with you.
And I'm excited to learn from you too as well. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how
Mm,
much did your family and school teach you about money?
Here we go. So I had a pretty unique childhood, pretty unique upbringing. My parents were hippies, and I mean the full on, every part of it hippie. We had a VW bus. We lived on 60 acres of land that we bought. We built our own house from the logs on the land. And I'm older, but I'm not. This is not in the pioneer days. This is fairly recently, and so I helped build our house. I helped, put the logs together. I nailed the roof on, and so I grew up without electricity, and it was really an interesting childhood. Pretty challenging on a lot of fronts. Not getting into the money part. We didn't have a lot of money, and so that was pretty challenging. Trying to kind of work through that. And there's a lot of my own kind of ambition that's built into that circumstance, right? Of not having money. But the not having electricity part was really hard too. There's a lot that was good about it because we had a TV that was one of those little 12-inch TVs that I had to plug into the car battery. And so I learned really early how to pop a clutch on a car to get a car to start because it only would last an hour, to watch the TV. And we got like one channel, and it was whatever was on is what you watched. But so it ended up that I read a lot, and reading is a really kind of fundamental part of my childhood for sure. But the money part is an interesting piece. Boy, do we have enough time, Rocky? I mean, the things that were interesting, I guess that if I'm trying to be like introspective about that, is that I really believed that I could change my circumstances and that I was going to change my circumstances. And that if I worked really, really hard and did all the right things, then my circumstances would change. And so in a lot of ways that was true. So my parents were anti-establishment. I was very establishment. So I went to school. I got good. I didn't even care if I went to school. They honestly were like, you can stay at home if you want. You could be homeschooled. And I'm like, no, I'm going to go to school and I'm going to get straight A's. And I'm going to do all the things, all the sports, all the clubs. And I did. I was, really an overachiever. And then I went right
I was going to
from.
say, how did that fit in, like with all the other kids?
So I just have one brother, and so he was the kid with the mohawk, at school that liked heavy metal. He was the artist. He was very anti-establishment too. So it wasn't great. Like he kind of thought I was a sellout, I'm sure.
Does he still think that?
Maybe. No, I don't know. Maybe not so much, but yeah, it was my way of coping, right? Is to become like a way of trying to be successful so that I could get out of those circumstances because I didn't like being poor.
It must be interesting to live without electricity.
It is still, I'm telling you, when I take a nice, good, hot shower, I'm like, what else do I need? What else do I need? Right? It's amazing how many things we take for granted. It's amazing how good we got it. It was a struggle. There's some times of year where it was fine, but when it was cold or snowy it was hard. And the reason I had to have glasses really early on is because I ruined my eyes from lantern light. I had a kerosene lantern that I did my homework by. So that was a little challenging.
Very interesting. And so I'm assuming you finished high school with your parents and then went off to college and did your own thing.
Yes, and I was so excited to go to college. So I grew up this is all in North Carolina. So I went and got into UNC Chapel Hill and was so excited to go to college and went there, had a great and wonderful experience there, majored in psychology, and went straight from there to a PhD program. So the whole time not having any money, this was all loans and scholarships, and what a crazy person to then go get more loans and scholarships to go get a PhD, but I did. And I am so glad I did it. Luckily, I found this field called organizational psychology, and I love it. It's so fascinating. And, the kind of connecting that back to my childhood, one of the reasons I attributed that we were poor is that my dad didn't keep a job. He was a carpenter and he would have a job and then hate it within a month. And so in my head, it was kind of deeply rooted in me, like, why is work so bad? Why is that the man so awful? Why are bosses, like every boss he had was horrible human being, It's like, and that I think was really deeply rooted in me, and sort of, again, another area where I'm like, I don't want to have that happen. I want to understand that. That's kind of a source of problems in my life.
Interesting. It's funny how our childhood can shape us, but yet the outcomes are different because your brother is very different than you, right? So just because we experience X doesn't mean we're going to do Y.
That's
You
right.
experienced it, he experienced it, you went widely divergent ways.
Yeah, completely. There was something, and I don't know, my mom says I was just born this way, but I sort of had this belief in myself, and this kind of self-efficacy, right? That of like, I could do that. I can make it better, which has served me so well, but it's also, it's hard, right? When you think you can change things, when you can make everything better, when you're running organizations and when you're, really working with other people, it's a challenge.
Do you still think you have to work hard to make money?
It's a really good question. No, I don't think hard. So this is the part where, and I don't have a good language for it, but when really use my brain, right? When my brain's really working, that's the part that makes money. And it's not a hard thing. It's a special thing. That
Okay.
sounds, I don't mean it, but there's only so much of it, I guess is what I mean. In a given day, I only have so many hours where my brain is really working well. And so when that happens, I feel like that's how I make money, but it's not something that I can like just power through and like turn to 50 hours, a day. I can't turn it on all the time.
No, that makes sense. Was there something that made you pick organizational psychology or
It was kind of funny. It was when I was an undergrad, in a psychology class, and it was one of those like introduction to psychology classes. And then it had careers in psychology on the back cover, and in the list it said business psychology. And I said, "Oh, that looks interesting." And it was a little description, and then at the very last sentence said, "And this is a great career for women." I don't know why it said that. Like, woman, maybe I should do that. So that was where I learned about it the first time. And then I started reading about it. And I went and talked to my advisor, and my advisor said, nope, don't do it. It's a fad. It's not a real career. And I don't know why, but I didn't stop with him. I went to a neighboring university where they had a program in organizational psychology, and the head of the department talked to me, and he described it all to me. And he said, no, this is a great area. You should absolutely go to graduate school in that. And you should, here's some other things to read about it. Don't listen to what your advisor said. And so I didn't. So I went right to graduate school.
Yeah, it's funny how certain people give certain advice through their filters. So be
Yeah.
careful who you're listening to.
Right. It's so true. I have to catch myself sometimes. It's so true.
That it is. So, what inspired you to write the book, The Power of Culture?
Yeah. So there's a bunch of things that kind of came together. First, I've been an organizational psychologist for 30 years. I've been working in this space for a long time. And I've done lots of different jobs and focused on a lot of different topics. And every time when I do that, I find that underneath it, kind of the cause or one of the big issues with the project is culture. And I was just really intrigued by that, and then started to study culture and really try to understand it. And what I learned from that is that the kind of academic or theoretical work around culture is very different from the practice of culture. So I studied culture, but I also was a chief people officer, and I found that the practice of culture and the science of culture are like night and day. They're so far from each other. And this book was really trying to be like an interpretation of what does the science tell us, and how can we make it easy and accessible for people? Like, how can we make it so that it's not impossible to do? To kind of create a little bit of meaning on top of the science so that people can actually help change their cultures. So that's what
I
made
work with
me. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I work with a lot of business owners. And I'm like, Many of them, because they're small businesses, don't creating culture is like way down the list.
Mm,
And I'm like, okay, first off, there is a culture in your business.
that's
Whether
right.
you actively create it or not, it's there. And if you're going to let someone else create it, good luck to you. The second thing that we tell people is you can train people, but you can't train culture. So
No.
we tend to tell people hire to culture because it's really hard to change people's core beliefs or values or the way they behave in the world.
Yeah.
And the problem is because you can look at the P&L and I know there's a problem, but the problem isn't the number. The problem is something happening outside. And I can't see culture in the spreadsheet, but I
Yeah.
can listen and hear and watch, and you start to understand over time that this is a cultural problem. This is a way we do business problem, and it has significant consequences to the bottom line. And when you hire people that don't fit, they cause so many problems that, yeah, it's a mess.
It is, and this is why so many companies are just kind of frozen and paralyzed. They don't know what to do. So back to your first point around every company has a culture. So this is let's just I just want to dig into that a little bit because it's absolutely true. So your organization, no matter the size, if it's more than two people, you have a culture. And what we need to understand, and this is the part that I see business owners not understanding, is how are people with each other and with the work in the day to day, right? Just in the day to day. They have all these choices. They're making little teeny tiny choices and really big choices. All day long, they're making those decisions. So what is guiding them to make those decisions? It's the culture that's in place. So if you're not really thoughtful about that, if you're not understanding or talking about what you want that to look like, it could be anything. And it could be actually things that are happening that are going against what you want to have happen in the organization. And most leaders don't have an understanding of what's really happening in the day-to-day work and how the culture is actually forming all of these behaviors, right? And so this is, in some cases, you can cross your fingers and say, well, I hope it's all going to work out. Like, I hope that they're doing the things the way I'd want them to be doing or the way I need them to be doing for this business to succeed. But I don't want to cross my fingers in it. I want to understand it and figure out what is it that people really think matters here. And if I would like them to know what I think if I was running that business, here are the things I think we need to focus on. Here are the ways we need to work together in order for us to achieve these kinds of goals. And so it's just that real intention about that. I have leaders telling me, they don't do things the way I want them to, or, it's not working out the way I want it to. I'm like, have you ever articulated what it is you do want? Have you ever said out loud, no, I want you to be this way, or I want us to value these things? And usually, oh yeah, I've never said it. I just expect them to figure that out, through osmosis.
It's funny. I went to a local lecture and it was a smaller company and they were talking about their culture. And their big thing was, how often do you walk into a company and up on the wall is their culture statement, right? Their
Right?
vision statement and all that stuff. And he goes, you have people stand in that room and face away from the wall and just ask the question, what does it say up there? And nobody can answer because
Nobody.
it's giving you day one. Here's our blah, blah, blah. And then nobody talks about it again. Nobody demonstrates it or lives within it. And so all of these problems occur, which kind of goes back to what you said at the beginning. There's a big gap between theory and practice. So, how do we differentiate between intended culture and lived culture? And it seems like, I don't know, but when I worked in corporate, we all thought that leaders got lobotomies because they couldn't see anything of what was going on in front of them. Like, how do you?
Completely. And it's so that whole like look at the values, turn around, and can you repeat, can anybody even say? I had a CEO who couldn't even tell me what his company's values were. And so, like, oh my gosh, and why have them, right? Why have them? And so it's a weird kind of evolution in the culture space where almost every company knows that they should be talking about culture, and they know they should have values, right? They have values behind the receptionist desk, as you said, or on their website. But then they stop. And maybe, like you said, a slide in onboarding included to talk about culture. And that's just, in fact, that can have some negative consequences to just have that. That's a term I call cultural betrayal, where you like think that this company's got this great culture and that you're excited about it, and then you get there and realize it's not that at all, right? It's not played out, it's not experienced. And so that's where most companies need to do some work, is how does this actually become real? And not real like I'm yelling at you or preaching at you and telling you and mandating to you that you have to live this stuff, but actually real from the perspective of, oh yeah, that's when I'm in my job and I'm working with my coworkers. Oh yeah, that's exactly how we are with each other, right? We do those things. We are experiencing those. So that is the hard work that most companies need to do.
The other thing I have noticed, and I think it's happening, I'm noticing it happening again in certain companies. When sales goes down, something affects the company, culture gets thrown out the door,
Yes.
and all of a sudden they implant this new culture of, the beating will stop when the morale gets better.
Yeah. It's always culture of accountability is what happens when the when the profits go down. All of a sudden, that's the name of our culture, is culture of accountability. It's ridiculous. You just see it over and over again. It's because this idea of actually creating a culture that aligns to our aspirational to our business strategy and the work we're trying to do in this organization. It often doesn't get connected to the work. It often is just thought of as like, oh, it's nice for us to have a good culture and maybe HR should drive it. And I'm supportive of that, right? Like, let's have a great place to work. But so it's sort of like culture's happy work. And so when things aren't happy, we forget about it. And it's actually, to me, just the opposite, is when hard things happen, when we're struggling, that's when we need it the most, right? How we are with each other and that we stay true to that. And that's just not, to me, it's because there's this fundamental disconnect between culture and business success. It's just culture is sort of its own separate project that somebody else besides the CEO is driving.
I would almost think, well, I'm going to say this because I see it in certain companies. The CEO and the C suite drive culture. There is no ifs, ands, and buts about it. Whether they
100%.
drive the culture that's on the wall or not is a different story. And it's funny because, these days, whenever you call a company at the end, would you take a survey? And every single survey is about the person in front of me who just helped me.
Yeah.
Not a single one of these questions say, do you think our leadership is
Mm-hmm.
doing a good job? And usually what I will do is at the end, they're like, anything else you want to say? And I'll usually be like, your culture sucks. It starts at the top. And that's the reason I'm talking to your person today, because you treat us so badly. And so
And it's
it,
such a shame. It's such a game, right? Because you
yes,
know that if you give a low score, it affects that person who is part of this larger system that has this crappy culture. And this is what is, I'm so with you on that. I'm always torn because I don't want, this person is doing the best they can within this system. They shouldn't be the one who bears the brunt of a negative score. You want the bigger system to change. Yeah, that's a really good example.
it's funny because your parents' favorite car company had some cultural issues, didn't they?
Yes, yes.
And they aren't the only ones. I mean, I'm noticing what we're hearing in the world of tech, like even the biggest one, like Google's going through massive cultural shifts. We travel a lot. So there has been a big cultural shift at Marriott.
Oh.
And it wouldn't surprise me because we get all our reward points. We tend to stay there 90% of the time. We've
Right.
noticed a big shift. And it could also be with the merger that happened during or just prior to COVID.
Yeah.
And so the culture has definitely shifted. And there's so many other companies that we see this with all the time. And
Yeah.
it's a shame, but they don't seem to do anything about it.
I know mergers and acquisitions are the biggest kind of obvious way that some of this plays out. The whole Boeing, McDonnell Douglas piece, right? A lot of the attribution of issues with Boeing planes is because of that acquisition by McDonnell Douglas. The focus before them being acquired, Boeing being acquired, was much more on safety. And when they got acquired, the focus changed to, near term, this quarter, what are our profits? And so, I mean, there are real consequences for these kinds of things to happen. I worked on one of the gigs I got to work on was I worked on 38 acquisitions. And my mind was blown about, well, first, that was such a cool thing to study that and to think about culture and climate of the company being acquired relative to the company that was acquiring it. And really seeing how much it changes things. It really fundamentally changes things. And I think you've probably heard some of the statistics. Most acquisitions fail. I mean, very few actually succeed. And cultures are one of the big reasons why, right?
Yes. So, out of curiosity, because this youngest generation doesn't seem to put up with crap. Yeah. Are you noticing that they're forcing culture change, or
Mm,
are they getting into like, hey, sorry, we're out of here, or like what's kind of going on?
yeah, I love that. I mean, I think about some of the things that I put up with as I was younger in my career, and I'm kind of thrilled that my son and my son's 24, my daughter's 20, that I don't think they're going to put up with it, right? They're not going to do the things that I felt like I had to do that I didn't really even in some ways question. And I think it's amazing. And I think it's well needed, for them to not put up with it. So the problem, of course, is that people need jobs, and people have to pay their bills. And I do get the reality of that. It's a privilege to be able to walk away from crappy situations. And so I think that when the economy is kind of the way it is now, it's a little tricky, right? Not knowing what's going to be happening and where things are going. But when things are kind of more stable, perhaps, I think you're right. The people who are able to, your best people who have other options, are going to walk away when the culture isn't one that is supportive. I mean, I definitely see that and hear that from a lot of people I know. I worked, one of the companies, I helped start a software company called Limeade. And we had a lot of people who were newer to career who worked with us. And I keep in touch with a lot of them. And they're like very focused on culture. And they absolutely are walking away from companies that aren't, it's really that cultural betrayal piece I was saying before, right? That aren't true to who they said they were going to be.
And that makes sense. Speaking of the economy, I realized anybody who's probably younger than 45 has never gone through a recession where it was meaningful to them. Like
Yeah.
you might have seen it as a kid that your dad, lost his job. You got to be probably, you have to be over 45 that it impacted you at a point where you were at least established. And
Yeah.
so I think there's a whole generation missing that. And it'd be interesting to see what happens. Just like you probably got to be in your almost 70 to know what inflation is, because that's the last time they actually dealt with it. So it's kind of
Right.
funny. So,
Significant inflation, right? When you think about like
yes.
mortgages that had interest rates of 17% or something like that.
Mhm.
We can't even comprehend that. But it was a reality for a lot of people. And the same thing with, like you were saying, with the recessions of people being laid off and not finding jobs. And so, yeah, I think that it's interesting how that shapes you and makes you kind of think about your situation and have more fear, right?
It does.
Right.
So we've also shifted to a remote world. how do you build culture in a remote world? Because that's something really, really difficult, I think.
It is. It's really hard. I think the way I kind of think about it is when we're in person, when we're in these offices before COVID, when all that was, before that, any of this wildness was in place, we had all these I call them culture props, right? You had your shiny office, you had your coffee, you had your ping pong table, you had all these culture props that really helped reinforce your culture and made it a place where you could say, look, here's examples of how we're collaborative, or here's examples of how we're fun. Here's examples of how we support each other. And when we went into these little boxes of being, working from home and being remote, those culture props weren't there anymore. So we had fewer things to call on, fewer things to point to. The only thing we have is the voice and the picture of the people who we're interacting with. And so what my manager says in these little boxes, what I hear the leaders say in town halls, have a lot more weight. They always have mattered, but they have even more weight when you don't have any other culture props around. So to me, it just reinforces how important quality of management, quality of leadership is in culture. This is one of the things that I see over and over again. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to call the book The Power of Culture, is because so many people in positions of power don't understand how they're influencing culture all day long, in very, like, what they say and what they explicitly talk about, but also what implicitly happens, the kind of inferences we make from the things that they're doing. And I just see all these leaders with missed opportunities. I see them left and right, missed opportunities to really shape the culture, reinforce the culture that they want to have. They just kind of let things hang. And so that's the power of culture. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to emphasize power, and how power and culture go hand in hand.
I think one of the reasons that occurs, and I didn't realize this, and we've talked about it on other episodes, when you get up towards top leadership, the noise around you is always positive. No one's ever saying, holy crap, what did you just do? You insulted half the audience, or like
Yes.
nobody's giving them real feedback. And because of that, I think
Yeah.
they get into a, I forget what the word is, but they're in an echo chamber that they
Yes.
don't realize. They're just oblivious to really what they're doing.
Yeah. Completely. And the things that they'll say and the consequences. I had somebody share with me a big company that I have worked with, where the CEO, somebody asked the CEO where she got her suit, and she said it. And a bunch of people went and looked up how expensive her suit was. And they were pissed. Right. And it didn't even occur to her that that might not go over very well. Right. And just the echo chamber of wealth, the
Why were
echo chamber.
why were they upset? Because
Because they're like a company that was very focused on cost and cost cutting, and her suit was extravagantly expensive.
okay, so it was a mismatch to the culture.
Yes.
It
Well,
wasn't the amount, it was the mismatch.
yeah, and it was more of, you just live in a different world than we do. You're so
Uh,
disconnected
Okay.
from us. So sort of to your point of being, they only are hearing kind of positive. They're in sort of this world that most employees aren't living in. And so that disconnect is also something I see over and over again, where the employees don't really feel like leaders understand what they do. They don't understand what their struggles are. They don't understand the things they're going through. They especially don't understand how the culture is influencing them. And so, kind of like your person on the phone call, that you were the customer service person, the culture is influencing that person on the phone with you, and how you feel about that company. And there's a huge disconnect for leaders.
Well, part of it is they're told what to say,
Mm-hmm.
and they have limited options, and they are trained to behave in certain ways. In order to do that
Mm,
job, you kind of have to.
right.
And they've lost empathy and compassion or anything else. And it's just what it is.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, like, if we were to look at all the companies, what percent do you think have a great culture?
That's I actually see quite a few companies that have great cultures, and so that's encouraging to me. Like I do see like companies that are very intentional, that the CEOs are driving it, that they get it. There's struggles along the way. If I had to guess, maybe like 40%
You
that
think
might.
that high?
Yeah, well, I think we hear a lot about the bad stories, right? You don't hear as much about the good stories. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's optimistic. What do you think, Rocky?
I would think it's a small percentage. Um, but it's hard to tell. It seems like it's not the norm. That
Yeah,
much
it's
I can
yeah,
say. They might they might pretend they have a good culture, but like you said before, the reality was it wasn't. And I think you even told a story about Sophia, right? The mother who is trying to balance
yeah,
her work and her kid, and they're telling her to work more and more, and they give her a promotion, and then the first thing they do is say, why don't you tell everyone how wonderful a company is to be a mom? And she just was like, are you out of your mind?
yeah, completely. And that's what I wanted to do in this book. I wanted to show, like, give real employee examples. We hear a lot about, like, at a company level, these really awful things that happen, but I feel like individual employees are impacted all day long with regard to culture. And so, like, seeing how it kind of plays out in these weird ways, in these really kind of sad ways. Yeah, the that example, and for her to be asked to talk about it and showcase it is just, it's just gross, right? It's, I don't know. I think that is very, just shows a lot about the show of it and what kind of company they are, right?
It does. And the other thing that you kind of talked about in the book is culture needs to be uniform across the organization. And it doesn't matter. You can have a very small business with, it might not even be departments. It might be people, the accountant and the salesperson and the production person and the office manager. And if they're all operating in different cultures, and when you get bigger, it becomes harder. And
A
when you get
problem.
bigger, then you have managers who create their own culture within each of these little
Yes.
silos, and it turns into chaos. How do you keep everyone together?
Right. Sometimes, people will say to me, well, if we have these lines of business and we have good leaders there and they're doing their thing, isn't that good enough? And so my question back to that is, well, is there anything that those lines of business need to do together? Like, are they operating independently? Then maybe it's okay that they have their own culture. But if there's something that we're trying to do together, are we trying to serve a customer in some sort of way, create a product together, then we have to have a common operating system for how we work together. And that's what these values, and when they're really experienced, these values can do. And so that's what I mean by we have to have that uniformity. And it doesn't have to be, you know, it doesn't have to be that every single thing we do is in the same way, but there's a core set of shared values that we probably need to have in order for us to do this, create this product together, to do serve our customer in a consistent way together. So that's the part of reason why we need to be able to have that uniformity, is so that we can do the thing together. And this is why I'm like always want to connect it back to what is the work, what is the business that we're trying to achieve, and how is it that we need to be with each other to achieve those things. And so you have to keep connecting it back to strategically what we were trying to do.
And that makes a lot of sense. So, as companies try to change the culture, which is difficult, what are some of the biggest mistakes they make when trying to fix their culture?
Yeah. So one of them is what I've mentioned already, is that they give it to HR. And I'm not anti-HR. I think HR plays a huge role in this. But I see this over and over again, right? You can tell by your face.
But here's the thing, and this is the truth of the matter. What I have found in a large corporation is the entire purpose of HR is to protect the company from the person. Their culture Like, they don't even have the right vision and purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not in the position to be able to actually do this work well, right? Now, some organizations have HR in a more strategic role, but not, a lot of them don't. So I agree with you. But that's one thing is don't give it to HR. So that's a huge mistake. I'd say not, really thinking about what's unique to your organization. So what I see a lot of leaders doing is, oh, they get excited about culture. They decide they're going to take it on. And then they go read a bunch of books around Netflix's culture or another company's culture. And they take a culture cookie cutter is what I call it. Like, well, they're doing this other company over here or our biggest competitor. They do it this way. So we're going to just take that culture cookie cutter and plop it over here and our organization. And so that's another thing that I see. Another mistake is not thinking about what's unique to us, what's unique to our history, our context, what we're trying to achieve. All those things matter. It has to be, what kind of culture do we need for us to be successful? So that culture cookie cutter, don't do that. That's a big problem. I'd say another one is thinking about this as a mandate, meaning, okay, I'm owning this and now everybody's going to do it. And as soon as I, send the email or do the one town hall, I'm done, right? Like, let's check that box. I did it. I owned it. I'm the CEO. Yay. And you just can't think about it as a mandate. I mean, literally, I've seen leaders send out an email and think that that's how you create culture. So the idea of how do you connect, I use the kind of idea of hearts and minds. You need to connect with the minds. There needs to be some some logic to it. It needs to connect to business strategy. It needs to make sense to people. But there also is a big part of this that's about emotion and inspiration and connection. That's the hearts part. So hearts and minds are really important to this work. And so a big mistake I see is just sort of missing the hearts piece.
And that makes a lot of sense. We probably should talk about Zappos because it seems like I don't know if they're currently still revered like they used to be, but I know for a long time they were culture.
Yeah, I know. It was that's the kind of example of taking what is Zappos doing and then we should do it. And I think it's awesome that they were trying some really unique things and that they were focusing on culture and they told their story about it. But to me, it's like, well, then each company needs to do their version of that. Like, what is it that is important to us? What differentiates for us? Not just take exactly what they were doing. Yeah, I remember when everybody's reading the Netflix books, and yeah, it's very tempting. I think there's stuff we can learn from it, but it's not. Don't learn about the process. Don't learn about exactly what they did.
So one of the things we talk about is purpose personally. And what I find is everyone's always trying to copy somebody else's purpose or keeping up with them or comparing to them in personal finance. And it
Hmm.
sounds like this is the exact same concept. It's like, that looks good. Let's do that instead of going, what do I want my
Yeah.
culture to be? How do like, and you said it before, what's unique about you? And I think that's where the people struggle is to say, this is how we do it. This is the way it's different for us. Instead, they try to be somebody else, and you can't
Yeah.
be somebody else.
Completely. Or they try to be like, I also see companies that just do such basic things, like they emphasize things that are just so basic and fundamental. Like one of the companies, their value was proactive. Like, so it just feels like, do you think being proactive is going to differentiate you? It didn't feel like a high enough bar to me, but just kind of boring too, and not special and unique to what we're trying to do. And like, can't you get a little excited and a little energy around what this company is about? You're making me fall asleep.
It's funny. I was in sales for a long time. And so in sales training, when you got that type of a thing, what the trainers would look at you and say, "So what?" Right?
Yeah.
We do things this way. So what? And then you've got to answer that. Like,
Right. Yeah. Yes.
and
That's
you've
what
got to
needs to happen.
peel the onion and get back
Yeah,
further to every
exactly.
part of how you do things.
That's right. The kind of the five whys, or the, why do we need to be proactive? Why is that true? Why is it that that's going to help us succeed?
It's funny. I don't hear many stories today about UPS. The early stories about
Mm,
UPS were they would sit there with timers, and we don't make left turns, and we do like we wear our keys on our pinky, and like they had all of these rules. I'm wondering if they just got to a point that they're so efficient that they don't have to keep going to that level of whatever, or did they lose their edge? I have no idea.
yeah, I don't either. You're right, because we used to hear a lot more about them and see a lot more in just commercials and things, right? And you just don't as much. I wonder from a market share, like how they're comparing to other
Well, I mean, it's them.
companies.
It's pretty much them, FedEx.
Yeah,
I don't think there's really anybody else in the game.
right. I know that Amazon uses the U.S. Postal Service. Yeah, yeah, I don't either. And I wonder from a culture perspective how that it just doesn't sound like we hear anything about it. Does that mean internally they don't focus on it too? I don't know. I don't know
It's
about UPS.
you mentioned Amazon, and it's funny because Amazon's a tech company in a sense,
Hmm.
and yet their culture is not tech company culture. I thought it was it's hilarious, and I guess they're because they talk about the Amazon. The only thing they give their employees is bananas. I'm like, what are you got monkeys? I'm like, who thought that culture up?
Well, they are interesting, I think, because there's a lot about what they do that's very focused on operations. They're absolutely a tech company, but also operations, right? And how to be efficient with how they do the operations of their business. And so I think that's a big part of who they are. You've probably heard of they have guiding principles or leader operating principles, and that's a big part. I mean, I don't necessarily, I personally wouldn't want to work there, but I could see how the way that they go about talking about their operating principles, or I should know that leadership principles, maybe, that everybody knows them, everybody understands them, they live them, they're real, they're experienced, and their business is doing well, that's for sure. So yeah, that's a
I think one of the weird things about Amazon is they have two distinct workforces. They have a very high tech, white
yeah,
collar, you know, and then they've
corporate.
got a whole nother group of people who are moving boxes.
Yes.
And I guess their culture is we treat them the same, or the benefits are the same. And so that's probably what kind of creates that issue. We had on Steve Anderson back in episode 404, which was the Bezos letters. So it was all about the principles that Amazon
Yeah.
uses. And the core of it is it's always day one. We're
Yeah.
always innovating. We're always changing. We're always figuring out how to keep up, how to do all of that. And their culture is it's okay to fail.
Yeah.
And that's a hard culture because if your management yells at you or docks you or doesn't give you a promotion because you failed, now you got a culture problem.
Yeah. And how do you balance that, right? Of saying, no, 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 I didn't mean that kind of failure. I meant this like innovation failure. And how do you walk that line, right? Yeah, but I think that the innovation is actually absolutely there. I mean, they obviously are showing that to us every day, that they're able to figure this out from just at scale, and all the new product lines. So they've got some things figured out, that's for sure. But again, I'm pretty confident that I would not want to work there.
I wouldn't want to work there. I tell my
Yeah.
son not to work there.
Right. I know my daughter, this was bizarre. She was offered as an internship to be a manager on the fulfillment line. I'm like, that's an internship. She was going to manage 6 to 8 people working the line as a 20-year-old. I'm like, wow, do not do that as far as you can from that.
Honestly, though, I think it would be a great way to learn about people in a high pressure situation.
Yes, agreed. But what I mean, to be working with people who are older than you, who have more experience, and you're 20 years old and trying to manage them. That just, I mean, I don't know.
It's a learning experience. That one is. That's a real learning experience, you know? And at that point, it's okay if you fail, right?
Yeah, just for those poor people who you're managing.
Well, she just have to call her mother every day and have a conversation. Mom, how do I do this in this culture? How do I tell that story?
Completely.
Is there anything we should have talked about but didn't get to today?
I think one of the things that we didn't really talk about that I was sort of another reason why I wanted to write this book. This topic is there's so much to understand. I find it inherently interesting. Like just how we are parts of culture and all the kind of characteristics of culture that make it really hard, but make it's just fascinating. And so just one of them that I'll spend a minute on is this idea that when we first start into an organization, when we first join, we can see it, right? It's all around us. We can see that, oh, that's weird, the way they do it here. They didn't do that way at my last company. Or what? Everybody's like, nobody asks any questions at the town hall. In my last company, everybody asks questions. You can see things really clearly. But once you become part of the culture, once you've been there for a little while, you can't see it anymore. It just becomes the way things are and the way we do things. And that to me is fascinating that we've just become kind of blind to it. And so it's really hard to study it. It's hard to change it when you can't really see it, and it's hard to put words to it. So I think, to me, I hope that people who are interested in the topic of culture will just dig into it a little bit more, read it, because it's pretty fascinating how it works. And the more I think we can do that and understand it, the better I think we can do things with it and deal with it, is when we understand it more. So that would be, I think, the only thing.
You are the average of the 5 people around you. So if you start going into that, you meld into what is there and it becomes your new norm. And so it's no longer different or weird.
Right.
It just is. And actually, there is one culture that I can't stand. This is the way we always did it.
Completely. Or, we've tried that before. It's not going to work.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's kind of funny how these things come together. But at the end of the day, I can definitely say culture and bottom line go together. It's just there's no line item for it.
That's
So
right.
it's so hard to measure and show it, but you can tell a well-run organization from one that isn't by looking at what their bottom line does.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. And it's not this perfectly direct relationship that you're going to see in one quarter. It is a
No,
longer term commitment. It's a longer term piece of this. But you get not only a better bottom line, but there's so many other benefits of working on your culture, in terms of maybe, creating a place where you might want to work, a place where you want to go to every day too, as the owner. So there's a lot of reasons why we should focus on.
that reminded me of another author who's talked about the way he built his company, and he's a little bit out there. Derek Sivers. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
Uh-uh.
He literally started a company from nothing and grew it up to probably millions, but he didn't run it. He's just like, if there's a problem, figure it out. And if I have to come in, I'm going to tell you how I fixed the problem, but not doing that. I'm going to tell you how I thought through the solution.
Mm,
Like, we did this because of these
yeah.
beliefs and this thing. So he would just kind of go in and he let the employees have control. There's good and
Awesome.
bad to that, because there
Right.
were parts where the employees all voted themselves all massive bonuses and he didn't make any money. Like, whoa, you got to have a line.
Right.
But
Completely.
at the same point, he's a little out there because he's more on the creative side. He's like I think he's a guitar player or singer. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But it's amazing, just reminded me of that whole cultural piece that kind of fits in there.
Yeah. And I think what he was voicing in terms of what was important and what he valued is for them. to show their, exert their own power, to have personal power, to distribute the power, and
Yes.
for them to make good decisions and think things through. And so by his own actions, he showed that was what was really important. And so that you can imagine, I mean, that's what has to happen in order for employees to be able to feel that, right? We can't really expect employees to go fix culture or go be the ones, I see this in a lot of organizations where they just create these culture committees that employees run and expect them to change the culture without the people who are in power to say, okay, no, you really can do this, and I'm going to support everything you do, and you tell me what to say. That's just isn't what is going to happen. There has to be that clear connection between people in positions of power and what you're trying to change about the culture. You just can't give it to employees unless you do what your friend, your person described.
Yeah, he essentially built an operating system for how to think, and that's what he did. And it's funny because I work with a lot of businesses and we talk about you need standard operating procedures. And he's like, "Well, I'll ask them all to create them." I'm like, "No, no, no, no. People don't know how to create their own
Yeah,
standard operating procedure, just like most people don't know how to create culture. You need somebody who actually knows how to do this to come in and help you do it. And once you've got it, then you can maintain it. You've got to have the right people come through to help you kind of build it."
right.
So definitely, definitely true. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
That's a great question. I think making the space and time for me as a human being. When I realized I could design my days the way that actually were better for me, it changed everything.
What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
Oh, that it all works out, you know? It really does. Like everything, it's just over and over again. I've gotten that message very clearly that it works out. It's all going to be fine.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
I can't believe I'm saying this because my daughter is 20. I'd say just have more fun. Like, just why not? Like I was so worried about my grades and about a job and about a degree. And I kind of look back and it's like, oh, I should have had more fun. So it's never too late, right?
If people would like to learn more about you, get a copy of the book, how do they do that?
So you can buy my book on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. It's The Power of Culture under Laura Hamill. Also, I have a website where you can get information about it. It's ParisPhoenixGroup.com. It's Paris, the city, Phoenix, the city. Those are my kids' middle names. And also on LinkedIn. You can always reach out to me on LinkedIn under Laura Hamill.
Awesome. We'll put that in the show notes. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Rocky. That was a fun conversation.
Thanks for checking out this unedited video of the Richer Soul podcast. You can find the full episode along with all the back episodes at richersoul.com. This podcast is brought to you by Profit Comes First, where we help business owners to have a more profitable and growing business so they can live the life of their dreams. Check that out as well wherever you listen to all this content.